To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. Life as an 18th century European merchant wasn't easy. You'd spend most of your time selling goods in your city, but when tax time came around, it was like the government pulled a smash and grab on your piggy bank. So when you weren't working to make sales, you were working to figure out how to keep enough of your profits to live. But then people started floating some new ideas about the government, like maybe it should actually serve the people paying the taxes to keep it running. And that sounded pretty darn good. This revolutionary idea spread, and spread fast, and before you know it, the idea of government for the people, by the people had gone ye old version of viral. These new ideas about a government's social responsibility to its people ultimately took Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the Age of Enlightenment, an era of about 130 years beginning in the late 17th century, bringing about ideas that would shape thought about government and society for centuries to come. Hi, I'm Rob Fuller, and this is Study Hall, Modern World History. Before the late 17th century, things in Europe were, well, a little dark. Europe had been struggling for years thanks to the Little Ice Age, which was a period of global cooling that started in the 14th century and wreaked havoc on European society. It led to poverty, disease, and war. And when disaster struck, people were desperate for an explanation why. Many people turned to religion, and this had a major effect on governments. Because religion was so deeply interwoven into daily life, empires had to build strong alliances with religious institutions. But it's not like this was a real sacrifice for them. The power of the church helped to validate a ruler's divine right to govern and the right to expand their empire's borders, which was a pretty cushy deal. I mean, seriously. Look at this throne right here. And in return, political rulers were also expected to support the power of the church. There's no Thomas Jefferson yet to, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, separate that church and state. Like you'd expect, this strategy worked pretty well for Europe's rich and powerful. They had a lot to gain. But this didn't work so well for a group of secular intellectuals called philosophes in French, who wanted to create real social change by influencing royal policies. The philosophes were inspired by the recent scientific revolution, specifically the idea that the logic and reason people use to make scientific discoveries could also make society better. The big idea is that philosophes believed reason was the key to understanding and improving the world around us, not just the Bible or church leaders' interpretations of it. By contrast, up until this point, most early modern Europeans were all about biblical tradition. They valued the practices they'd inherited from their elders and their elders and their elders and so on. So these Enlightenment thinkers were really charting their own path. They wanted to throw out social practices that were useless or downright harmful, no matter how long they'd been around. And they were especially critical of unquestioning faith, institutionalized religion, and superstition, which they believed were creating a barrier between the people of Europe and positive social change. In fact, reason became so important during this period that the Enlightenment movement earned a nickname, the Age of Reason. From the start, the Enlightenment movement thought the church had too much social and political influence. For instance, Christian religious groups used their beliefs and teachings, known as doctrines, to get folks to stay in their lanes. Like, if God said the world was great the way that it was, well, you were in the wrong then if you thought otherwise. And if God said you should give money to the church or support the monarch of your particular empire, well, you had to do that too. But Enlightenment thinkers just weren't buying it. In fact, many turned away from doctrine and toward deism, the belief that God created an orderly universe for humans to inhabit and live in as they chose without additional divine intervention. For example, when an earthquake devastated Portugal in 1755, the Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire said that, rather than being an act of God meant to punish, disasters like this happen without divine reasoning. For these deists, the question wasn't reason versus religion, but how reason could be used to support religion and vice versa. And perhaps there wasn't a whole lot reasonable about supporting the religious and governmental systems that leave you and your merchant neighbors struggling to make ends meet. Ultimately, deists wanted these powerful religious institutions to adopt practices that helped people find freedom through rational thought, rather than just taking orders from God via the church. Enlightenment thinkers also believed that governments themselves were tyrannical. Absolute monarchies, like in Austria and France, gave the king total power over, well, everything. And these kings aimed to consolidate their power even more to build themselves up at the expense of their citizens. Enlightenment thinkers wanted to change that. They believed governments should create policies that benefited society as a whole and not just the king. This concept in particular became known as the social contract, and it went on to inspire tons of future governments, including the US Constitution. According to British philosopher John Locke, a social contract is a pact between the rulers and society, or the people over whom they rule. In this contract, governments provide benefits to their citizens, like protecting the country from invasion, and in exchange, people gave the state some control over their lives in the forms of things like laws and taxes. Because hey, those anti-invader armies had to get paid somehow. Now, for this give and take to work, everyone has to be on the same page. If the social contract went according to plan, everyone would agree on the government's responsibilities and what the people owed them in return. But if the government didn't meet its end of the bargain, well, then the people had the right to instate a new ruler who would. Which, as time eventually showed, would probably involve busting out pitchforks or a guillotine. Not yet, France. We'll get to you pretty soon, I promise. Here's the thing about all these new ideas, though. For anything to catch on, people had to hear what these Enlightenment thinkers were, well, thinking. And it turns out there was no better place to do that than ye old Starbucks. I'll take a venti black coffee for Bartholomew. Free trade and plague free, I trust? Seriously though, in addition to like the birth of modern government, the Enlightenment led to the creation of the first European coffeehouse, an idea they nabbed from the Ottoman Empire, where the first coffeehouse opened in Istanbul in 1555. The rise of the European coffeehouse was made possible by the vast global trade routes established in the previous centuries. The products sold in these cafes were traditional food and drink from all over the world, brought back to Europe via their colonial footprint on the rest of the globe. Like coffee from Africa, chocolate from the Americas, and tea from China and India. And if you pull the curtain back even farther, these super cheap goods were also made possible by the labor of countless enslaved people, especially when it came to coffee and sugar. These coffee houses became crucial public meeting points for European society. Before this point, there just weren't many public spaces where people could share ideas. I mean, sure, there were pubs, but their beverages weren't the best for the clear-headed exchange of ideas, if you know what I mean. But at a coffee house, you could get your fix of caffeine while also rubbing elbows with people you might never meet otherwise. And it turns out that these cafes aren't just a place to mooch free Wi-Fi and pretend to write your dissertation. In 17th and 18th century Europe, you couldn't get a lavender oat milk latte at one of these places, but you could exchange ideas about the news, scientific discoveries, and politics with other savvy thinkers without worrying about breaking the rules of polite society. See, 18th century Europe was still full of class boundaries and hierarchies, even among educated elites. But in most coffee houses, these rules didn't apply so strictly, because what happens in coffee houses stays in coffee houses. Coffee houses were the first public sphere in Europe where anyone could come to share their ideas or critiques. Anyone, that is, as long as they were still men of upper middle class status or higher. The working class was stuck at home with their Keurigs. And like other public spaces at the time, women weren't allowed. While there were notable intellectuals of color who hung with the coffee shop crowd, including German thinker Anton Wilhelm Olmo, by and large, the scene still looked an awful lot like a Connecticut country club. Nonetheless, these public spheres allowed Enlightenment ideas about society to spread. They let people with different perspectives share ideas and solve problems together, which was great for freedom of expression, but made rulers pretty nervous. For instance, back when the first coffee houses were popping up in the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Murad IV believed they'd become a safe haven for opponents to the crown. So he did what any imperial ruler would do. He made coffee drinking a capital offense, which, if that were still in effect, I would totally be the most wanted man in the world. And once coffee houses spread throughout Europe in the 1650s, King Charles II of England tried to ban them too. His dad, King Charles I, was decapitated for treason during the English Civil War, so he knew what could happen when people started talking politics. Of course, this went about as well as you'd think. People weren't giving up their beloved caffeine or their new public sphere for the epiphanies they found there. Like, where else could you learn about science while Isaac Newton dissected a dolphin? Which is something that actually happened, and which maybe makes the chit-chats and study sessions at today's coffee shops seem a little lame. Though, I bet the health department might have a few things to say about dolphin dissections. In any case, Charles II's ban led to widespread protests, and this angry mob had both strength in numbers and caffeine, so like basically unstoppable. Coffee shop owners sent representatives to plead their case, and in the end, the king lifted the ban just 2 days before it was set to go into effect. Some even suspect that the king was even influenced by his own minister's love of coffee. Now, to be fair, it's not like these monarchs had nothing to worry about. Besides being a place to exchange new and interesting ideas, coffee houses showed people that their opinions mattered and could even have weight. And ideas like the social contract really started to catch on. People started to think that, hey, maybe governments should serve everyone after all. And if they didn't, well, that implicit threat of revolution began pushing empires to listen to the people. Enlightenment ideas like the social contract were contagious, and the Age of Reason took Europe by storm. But all this hoopla went to Europeans' heads, and they started to believe that their emphasis on reason meant that they were the most enlightened people in the entire world, and that their culture was superior to all other cultures, which is not very reasonable. They even started to look at other empires across the globe as templates for how not to govern, and then increasingly swooped in to take over these lands themselves. For the good of the people, of course, and okay, also because more land meant more money, power, resources, and global domination. So while the Enlightenment movement showed how reason could improve society, it also fed into the mindset of European superiority that then enabled centuries of colonialism, imperial domination, and devastating new forms of racism. But for good and for bad, these Enlightenment ideas were here to stay, and went on to shape governments for centuries to come. So the next time you vote, pay taxes, or hit up your corner cafe for a matcha latte, you've got these Enlightenment philosophers as well as centuries of global connection, trade, and discourse to thank for those things. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking online courses and earning college credit, visit gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.